All right, it's perfectly fine if other folks join us, but we are going to jump into it as we have a lot of content. And as much as I love Duke Ellington, I am going to put in a pause so that we could hear each other. Welcome and welcome. I know things look a little bit different today. I'm here with, I'm the Training and DEI Programs Manager here at Mentor Virginia, and I am happy to host our conversation and training on our part 7 of the EEP workshop series that you all have been a part of to discuss closure. I am joined here today with my partner and colleague, Sarah Wilkinson, and I know it's a little different from you all, but before we begin, I just want to give Sarah a moment to say hi also, and we'll jump right into it.
Good morning, everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces on here. It's great to see folks joining us on this Friday for the second to last part of the series. If you have been with us since the beginning, it has been a great and also long road to get to the end of this series and learn all of the best practices. I mean, I'm sure you all have experienced just how much information there is around quality mentoring programming.
All right, we will get into it. Just as a heads up, in speaking about it looking differently, as you probably know, our executive director, Natalie Foster, she did take another position and transitioned out of Mentor Virginia at the beginning of January. And so she is the face you're used to seeing. I hope you don't mind Sarah and I stepping in to finish out the series. We're excited to be with you as we endure the closure training. And it's actually a perfect time to discuss this because as we had a friend and colleague transition out, we may have some feelings around that we will be able to talk about and get to today, that the mentors and the mentees in our lives will experience when they reach this point in their relationships also. And so for the first 60 minutes, it will be a lot of talking and information. There will be some audience participation. And then the last 30 minutes will be an activity where you all get to practice some of the things that we discussed and learned today. And so please excuse me because I will be toggling between two screens to get to my notes. Mentor Virginia's mission is to foster quality mentoring relationships that empower, elevate, and encourage young people. Our vision is to make sure that every young person in Virginia who needs a mentor will have a trained mentor. And so with this series, this is really the technical pieces of putting a program together. And so we will be approaching it as if you haven't run a program just yet, or like you're in the beginning stages. And so if some of you in the audience are here and you have more experience in running a program, please feel free to raise your hand or contribute to the conversation as you see fit with your expertise as well. Before we begin, just to learn a little bit from everyone about who is in the room, if you wouldn't mind sharing a line about why you came today in the chat, and be sure you have your name and your pronouns listed so that we know how to appropriately respond to you. And so as everybody is doing that in the chat, just a little bit about me since I'm a new face. Again, my name is Tiara Whitfield. You can call me T or Tiara. I've worked in youth development for 20 years now, and I come to Richmond, Virginia, to Mentor Virginia, being raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I grew up in the program sector there. And so I'm happy to take a look at the chat and see who's with us in the audience. Anybody want to share a reason why they came today? Something they hope to walk away with? Right, someone is supporting multiple programs across Virginia. The value is learning more about how mentoring works and how they can better use resources and programs. And we'll have other opportunities today to connect as well. Hi, Laura. Also came through to just, check out best practices and make sure that she's in tune as well at running her program. Before we get started, Sarah will just go over some brief highlights for us.
Yeah, so this series is part of our 8 workshop series, Elements of Effective Practice. So we started back in July. We will continue through the last workshop in February. Those who attend all 8 workshops or complete the assessment work that we have for each workshop will be eligible to earn a certificate in the EEP at the end of this. So we'll start to award those come February. And we will also have a companion workbook with part 7. We've done this for every single part of the workshop series so far. And by the end, if you collect all 8, you'll have a very nice, complete sort of look at a lot of the resources that are available for all the different elements of effective practice. For today's companion workbook, just gonna ask for a little bit of grace because we had our executive director transition out over the last couple of weeks. We did not quite have a chance to finish all the finishing touches on this companion workbook, so we were going to get this to you by Tuesday of next week. So I know typically we would be dropping that in the chat this time, but when you get it on Tuesday, you'll also get this PowerPoint presentation. You'll get the recording of this workshop as well, so you'll be able to look at everything and have all the resources at that time. And then also just want to mention at the front end of this training that we do provide no cost technical assistance consulting that is available to all youth mentoring programs in the state of Virginia. So if there's anything that we talk about today surrounding closure, or you want to build out some of your closure best practices, we do have a team of experts that we work with who can provide that support to you at no cost. And then just to give a little contextual grounding, this workshop series is rooted in the elements of effective practice for mentoring. So these are the national best practice standards for youth mentoring programs that are based in decades of research at this point and evidence of what works in youth mentoring programs, as we try to keep youth safe, and we also try to have impactful programs. A lot of the best practices that we are going to be focusing on today are rooted in one-to-one mentoring matches that work in either community or site-based settings. Do keep in mind, though, that we have a whole host of supplements that are also available, and we'll make sure you have those links. So if you're running any mentoring program or group mentoring or peer mentoring, STEM mentoring, workplace mentoring, or you're working with the LGBTQ population, we do have additional information on closure best practices that you can dig deeper into.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And as always, we do have some just learning norms. Everyone is welcome to participate. Everyone has the right to pass. However, learning is a community experience where we can share and learn from one another. I'm here to facilitate conversation and definitely give best practices. But as I mentioned earlier, we are surrounded by other experts in the field. And so we do want to make sure we share the airspace with one another to add some time for other people to contribute. If you feel the need to take a break, please take care of yourself as needed. And most importantly, everything we discuss in here is confidential. We can use the information, but please don't share any names or of students, of programs. Keep the experiences private, but take the lessons with you. And we will go ahead and we will jump right into it. Our objectives for today. We would hope that you will walk out of here understanding the role and importance of bringing mentoring relationships to a formal close. We want to identify strategies for all kinds of closures for you. We're going to focus on anticipated, unanticipated closures. And then finally, as I mentioned before, towards the end of our time together today, you'll have some practice responding to end of match scenarios. And so just to begin, as we lay the foundation for match closures, just as we've said in the past, for those of you who have continued on through the series, we've reached the end. This is the closure training. And so we are speaking as if you have done all of these things. You've recruited the right mentors, you've screened them, provided them with the appropriate training, made the effective matches that you needed to make. And then you also have been monitoring and providing support to those matches. And so finally, through all of those steps that you've taken, we're reaching the closure phase. So again, plan for those anticipated expectations, but also plan for the times where we don't expect for matches to end, and they do. So can I please at this time have a volunteer to read the entire screen for me, starting on the left with the tweet. And you can just come off of mute and go ahead and start reading.
Do it. I was in my 20s when I realized nobody ever talked to me about how to end a relationship. They will have to think you have to crash and burn to get out of relationships. What if somebody told you that you could pull over, park, and get out of the relationship? Closure or termination is a normal stage in the life of a mentoring relationship. Programs should facilitate bringing all matches to a formal close in a way that affirms the contributions of the mentor and the mentee. They should also have time to prepare for the closure and reflect on the experiences shared.
Thank you, Anissa. I appreciate your volunteering. I thought it was so prolific that when I started editing this presentation, I, was just checking my phone in a lull, and it came across my screen, this tweet. I don't know if it came from Twitter, if it came from Instagram. I was in a lull, and so I was lost in my phone. But again, I found it so prolific that people out there in the world, while we were going through this training in this phase and talking about closure, they're having these real world experiences. And so I'm not sure how old this person was who had this experience, but it's really relative to the work that we do. So yes, closure or termination is a normal stage in the life of mentoring relationships or any relationship. And it's most important to acknowledge that in all mentoring relationships, they will go through some type of a transition or end period. And so even though sad or what we regard as negative emotions may come up, it's not necessarily a negative experience. It is part of the process. And so it's up to the adults in the room, the staff and the mentors to really model the expectations around that. For all intents and purposes, it is important for us to begin shifting our thoughts about mentoring and the work that is achieved through mentoring experiences. Essentially, adult mentors who work with youth are engaging in intentional and strategic friendships and relationships with these young people. For a certain amount of time, whatever the program cycle, these mentors are charged with the responsibility of practicing and modeling a very high level of social emotional processing through relationship building, and in turn are teaching their mentors or proteges, whatever your preferred term. They're teaching them lessons in SEL, through how they approach situations and through the interactions that they have with the youth. Also, they're teaching youth how to cultivate positive relationships. Programs and organizations that support mentoring initiatives and provide opportunities for such conditions should have comprehensive written plans for closing mentoring relationships that again address all anticipated and unanticipated closure possibilities. And so we're going to dig a little deeper. Let's see here. I would like to go through this slide. I would like for us to first think about the prompt. Then we'll have some time to share out verbally. And then I'm going to ask us to conclude this slide in the chat. Going back to our point about intentional friendships and relationships, I want to walk through this reflection exercise to see why we think as a group ending and providing closure to relationships are important. So again, I want you all to think about some of the non-familial or familial relationships in your life, no family. How did they begin? What was their purpose? And so we're thinking back to maybe our childhood best friends, our partners. How did they start? What was the purpose? Did we have a purpose when we first met these people? And then next, I would like to hear from a few of you. Think about the relationships that you have experienced, family or friends at this point, the relationships that have ended. How was the ending handled? And how was that, how did the end impact you or impact that person? Does anyone have an experience they can share or tell us about?
I can talk about the family or friend relationship.
Thank you.
As a foster child, I had several siblings that were foster brothers, foster sisters. They were not happy that I was in their family, and the relationship ended when both of my foster parents passed away. the brothers, my sister, my foster sister did just pass away, and my foster brothers don't have any contact with me at all. So for me, it was like I was not only grieving losing my foster parents that I had for several years, but I also had to grieve losing brothers and sisters. So it was a long grieving process for me.
I'm sorry for your loss, your recent loss and the former loss. And thank you for sharing and being vulnerable with us, Priscilla. With the closure that you were provided, or would you consider there being any closure with the relationships at all, with the finality of them?
Not really, other than, having my daughter to lean on and talk to, as well as a counselor, and helping me process through that. Because I've had several relationships over the years that I've had to have closure on, and they were foster families. So it was explained to me by my counselor that every time I had to leave a foster home and go into another foster home, it had to be almost like a grieving process for each one, because it was, if I held on to that or held on to what went on in that family, it would deter me from being able to go on in the new family I had.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to process all that. And I've kind of looked at mentoring the same way, in that you've been with somebody that, even if it's a short period of time, you've been with somebody that you've connected with, and losing them is almost like losing a loved one. So you kind of have to take different processes of the grieving process and work through that.
Thank you for sharing. And I think we can all hear some of the pain in Priscilla's voice, because again, ending enclosures and ending relationships with people that you care about, they do bring up those negative emotions for you. And as she shared, it's really important to learn techniques to be able to work through them so that you don't have carryover into the next relationships. Thank you again for sharing, because I know sometimes it's difficult to be that vulnerable, but I appreciate how you take those lessons that you've learned and you help implement those lessons into the lives of some of the youth that you work with. From other experiences that people have thought about, please type in the chat. It could be a simple yes or no, or you can give a little bit more meat and potatoes. Could anything have made the ending more positive for you? What would closure have looked like if closure was provided for those experiences? The correct closure. Take just a minute to allow you to type that in. I am a divorced person, and so I will say that there is definitely finality and closure with finality of being divorced, or severing a relationship like that. But when certain strategies aren't taken, certain emotions do carry over. And so what we can and should take away from this exercise and this information about relationship building is that it's a process. And with that process, there will be that transition or that ending. As we think about mentoring relationships and our approach to preparing mentors and mentees, creating a formal closure experience can help youth and mentors increase their skills in saying goodbye, preparing for difficult transitions and endings, and recognizing such occurrences as part of the process. But again, not focusing on the negative, but taking it and creating a learning experience behind it, because they'll experience those things throughout life. All right, let's see here. Going back to our point about intentional friendships and relationship building, Oops, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong side, folks. Here we go. From the experiences we just shared, we all know that relationships end for all kinds of reasons. So do mentoring relationships. By the time of closure, we can expect your programs to have already worked through the steps that it took to create a quality program. You've confirmed the expectation of closing at this point. We want to make sure we get it in writing. It is the program's responsibility to do these other steps as well. We want to create and share information with people who can be impacted by the end of the match. So other program participants, family members, and we want to make sure that we capture that the match is closing by using some type of documentation like a match closure summary. Before we can begin planning for appropriate closure responses, we do have to know a little bit more about closure types and be able to identify the type of match that it is and the type of ending that it is. Is it an unanticipated closure, an anticipated closure? When it comes to anticipated closures, these are the things that we expect. The benchmark states program has a procedure to manage anticipated closures when members of the match are willing and able to engage in the closure process. And so programs should create rules that determine what happens when closures take place and should create steps and practices to follow depending on the type of closure experience. These closure policies and processes are documented best practices for general operations, risk management, including that physical safety, the mental and social safety that Priscilla shared with us is so important, and the general well-being and sustainability of your program. What we can consider anticipated closures are those closures that take place at the natural end of the program. So when it's listed that the program and the mentoring experience is supposed to be over. Another type of anticipated closure is just a bad match. We know there are signs the mentor and mentee have complained. They just don't necessarily fit and they don't want to be a match with each other anymore. We can plan for that. And also when there are general problems with a match that perhaps these people no longer want to be a part of the program and they just want to terminate the experience, we can plan and provide some structure around how those people exit the program. On the flip side, there are those unexpected or unanticipated closures as well. As the benchmark states, benchmark 6.2, the program should have a procedure to manage unanticipated closures as well. And so these are things that we can't necessarily predict. It should still be a structured process, but it takes some brainstorming and some discussions with your team to figure out what these might be. Before I go on, I did hear somebody come off mute. Does somebody have something to share or have a comment?
It's one of those things that we tackle as we budget.
I love the digital world. Sorry about that for calling you out. It might have just been a mistake. Unanticipated closure instances should be regarded as things that happen that are out of the program and staff's control. So again, this is when you're coming in to help with the feelings, with the mentors and the mentees' feelings, because you couldn't necessarily predict that it was going to happen. And so a youth or a mentor moving out of the area, somebody in that pair violating program rules, or even someone having their schedules change and they're just no longer available to be a part of the mentoring program. These are all endings that could be considered unanticipated. And then we have a third category. We didn't talk about this too much at the beginning because it's difficult. It's difficult sometimes to explain and it's difficult sometimes to understand. And so the benchmark for difficult closures is as follows. Your program should have a procedure to manage closures when one member of the match is unable or unwilling to engage in the process. And so this is what we would consider like an outlier. A difficult closure could be for an anticipated situation or an anticipated situation. And so if we know that a match is going to end because it's the end of the program year, we're anticipating this, we're planning and putting structure around it. We may even have the mentee come and it's the day of the closure meeting, but the mentor doesn't show up. That becomes a difficult situation. And so we should have a policy or a practice to put into place to be able to deal with that. Same thing for the unanticipated situations. As a mentor's availability changes and they quit or decide to not participate in the mentoring program anymore, perhaps this person doesn't have time or they don't have interest in a smooth transition and they quit by email. So it's on the program to be able to provide that closure for the mentee, to help them process their feelings about the closure and or find them a match in a new adult mentoring candidate. Karen, I also saw that you came off. Did you have anything to add or any questions here?
No, I am just learning about this mentor process, and I really don't have anything to add.
Thank you. Thank you.
See, part of it too is when folks join the meeting, they come in unmuted. So that's what you're
I
seeing.
got you. I got you. All right, I'll stop calling folks out. I'm sorry, but please, if you do have a question, raise your hand and Sarah will alert me and we can get your question in there. All right, on the screen right now is just a sample of
See, I do see Pam. Pam is off mute and I think has a question.
oh, sure, Pam, what's your question?
This class actually, this workshop actually comes at a perfect time. I got an email yesterday from a mentee or mentor who has had something happen in her life. She didn't go into any details, but she is having to leave her mentee. And so, because I've never done a closure like this before, I don't have any idea of how to process this, or other than letting the mother of the mentee know that we will put her on a rematch list. You know, but what type of closure do I need to do between the two of them?
And sure, because the mentor let you know before we can kind of classify if it's anticipated or not, did they give you a time frame of when they would be able to transition out, or was their contact to you them telling you that they had to end their participation at that time?
They're ending the participation at this time.
Okay, yep, so definitely a difficult closure for you. We will touch on that throughout the presentation, but again, if you feel like you have questions towards the end of the presentation, feel free to stay online and we can have a one-off afterwards as well to be able to better point you in the direction of some immediate resources that you can get to as you're going through it.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you, Priscilla. Okay, as I was stating here, this is just a quick example of what a policy can look like. As you'll notice this little triangle down here, if you've been in the class before, you're used to it, but if you're a newcomer, this signifies a companion guide blurb, or that this information will be in the companion guide. So this again is just a quick snapshot of a policy. There should be a full page of how it's written out in the companion guide. And same thing for a match closure summary example. There's going to be a sample of this in the companion guide as well. All right, so we mentioned like timing a little bit earlier, and how timing impacts closure practices. It really comes into play for the unanticipated closes. However, timing does have a huge impact on all closure experiences. Youth mentoring research suggests that failing to provide some sort of resolution or closure process at the end of a relationship can be particularly damaging for mentees who've been let down by other relationships with adults. These youth are more likely to become vulnerable to negative feelings resulting from poor relationship endings. Without support closure processes, youth may internalize negative feelings like abandonment, fear, or confusion, or just make up stories in their minds. And that blurb that I just read you is some research for Spencer that was put out in 2007. But if you take a look at the chart, I'm going to actually focus my attention to the green box under the well-timed ending, and we're going to regard this as like a functional kind of closure. This is one that can be expected, and we're putting structure behind it. you take a look at the italicized words, in each box there are italicized words, and those words are how kids can feel after participating in this type of closure experience. And so early on, we said like closure and saying goodbye is sad no matter what, but we can't necessarily always avoid sad feelings. We should be able to teach kids how to deal with them and how to learn from them and go into them knowing that they're going to happen, but being prepared. When you have a well-timed ending that is expected and structured, that's something that's planned. We're going to be able to provide that complete activity. And so that's why I was asking Priscilla those questions earlier, if the mentor was ending at that time or if they were giving her a timeline of when they could end services. If they gave her a timeline, she would be able to set into motion closing proceedings. She would be able to plan out something so that they could all have a meeting and talk about feelings, and she would be able to get the appropriate paperwork that she needed completed. But unfortunately, she doesn't have that. She is in the category of early ending and dysfunctional because it's unexpected. And right now it's unstructured. Because it's perfect timing and she's coming to this training, we hope to be able to move her from the red box to the blue box by the end of it. And that is the early ending that becomes functional because even though it was unexpected and the mentor left the program, she's going to still be able to put some structure in there and provide the activity or at least a meeting for the student so that they can talk about their feelings and learn that it wasn't their fault. And even though they may leave that situation feeling sad or even pensive because maybe they were really connected to their mentor, at least they will know it wasn't their fault and they'll be able to move on, hopefully past that relationship and continue engaging in positive relationships. And so before I go on, I am going to pause to see if there are any questions or comments, and we'll see if you all can check your understanding before we move on to the next section. Any questions or comments for me in the chat, Sarah?
I have a question.
Sure.
And I don't know if it's something that you're going to touch on later. So if it is, just stop me. We have had a few recently who the mentor has kind of decided very quickly in the match process that they are not interested and has kind of just, for lack of a better term, ghosted very soon. And then we have been able to rematch those mentees within like a month or 2 months. Do you think that a closure process is still necessary for that situation? Because we've kind of just been, well, they didn't really have much of a relationship and we're starting a new one for them. So we haven't done much with those closures. We've just focused on, yay, we have somebody new for you.
Right. Before I give my input, I'm going to post that question to our peers in the audience. What do you all think? Any perspective here?
Yeah, I think the closure process is still really important in that situation because even if the relationship is really short, the timeline of the relationship doesn't necessarily reflect directly to how the mentee might be feeling about it. You know, it could still be an impactful experience, or it could still be, you know, challenging, or that, you know, they could still feel, for, you know, to use the phrasing along with ghosting, they could still feel some type of way about it, and that they still have a space to be able to process being able to move from one mentor to the next, or even as part of your rematching process. I think it would still be important to give the youth a space to be able to talk through that as part of preparing for the new mentor as well.
Thank you, Stephanie. And Raven Walker seems to echo your comments in the chat. And I would agree, Becca. I know when we come to this place and we're learning about best practices, we are all in an ideal world and we're acting as if programs have time to do all of these things very well. And so we know that in the real world, things move really quickly. And so I would agree that something needs to be done, but it may not be to the scale of what you would do if a program match ended 3 months in. And so as you're building out procedures or as you're adapting procedures due to changes, perhaps you do have conversations with your staff. What do we do if it's between this period of time? Let's just say early onset to the first month. And what do we do if it's a month to 3 months? Just so you would have at least had the conversation so that you could be prepared if something like that happens again in the future. And we will touch on rematching and then revisit this later in the presentation, but thank you for asking the question. And thank you, Stephanie and Raven, for your feedback.
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, true or false? Most, if not all, mentoring relationships come to an end. And I helped you cheat a little bit because I got a little finger happy on the clicks and I showed the answer already. But what do we think? Is it true or false? You can put a T or an F in the chat. It is true. 1/3 to 1/2 of mentoring matches not only end, they end prematurely before the program cycle ends. Oops, I see a typo. I'm going to note that for next time. Most relationships, when it comes to mentoring, they end. It's an anomaly to have mentoring relationships that start really early on in middle school and high school that sometimes span throughout the decades of life. It doesn't mean they don't happen, but a lot more times than not, mentoring relationships end early. And so as you're preparing for closure policies and practices, it's good to know that information. Oops, before I ask the question, it's also true that how mentoring relationship ends, it matters. As Raven said in the chat and Stephanie gave her answer to Becca, impacts can be felt by mentees, by mentors, and it's no telling how close people were, regardless of how much time they spent together. Also, another impact that can be felt when it comes to how we handle mentoring closures as a program would be the impact and reputation it leaves for our programs. If we pride ourselves on having a high quality mentoring program, but we don't provide certain closure experiences for our mentees and mentors, people walk away from those experiences with negative feelings and perhaps a negative feeling about the program because they don't feel settled or like they've had that time to like reflect and not only understand, but really get the benefit of the process. And I guess I'm bad at tests. I'm going to move my hands away from the screen so I can ask the last question. True or false in the chat? Many individuals are bad at saying goodbye. Is that true or is that false? I see a lot of truths and I saw one false. Who said false? And tell me why, Kinshasa. Why do you think it's false?
I think it depends on the person. For some people, it's not hard to detach from a relationship, no matter what the relationship might be. And sometimes you just have to just break away that way, you know, where there's no type of closure, no anything. You just have to let go and be done. So that's why I say false.
I appreciate that. I think, you know, people handle situations differently and there's no telling what a pandemic is going to put people in the mind to do since we're dealing with this most prominently. I would say it would be a little bit of a flag if people can detach so easily. There may be some stuff behind the scenes there because they didn't have good closure experiences in their lives to be able to refer back to. But when it comes to good health for both participants or all participants in a relationship, it is healthy to provide some type of a formal closure. And many people do avoid directly having to end relationships for the negative feelings. As a program, we do have the ability to formalize and support this process. It's a responsibility of ours to help mentors and mentees in their relationships.
So we have reached our first resource roundup of the presentation. For those of you who have been to other presentations we've given, this will look like a familiar sort of format. And typically you would already have the companion workbook to sort of cross-reference and see where these resources are. But when we are able to get that to you, you will see all these resources and more around supportive research and best practices for match closure. There's webinars that you can watch for kind of additional information. There are some best practice guides like the first one listed there. There are also some sort of almost like tip sheets that are set up to talk about, how do you create a match termination ritual? What are some of the best practice recommendations that you can do in steps, and how to prepare your mentors for match termination? All of those resources will be available in the companion.
The mute button is never my friend. All right, we have defined closure and discussed the types of closures. Now we're going to talk about actually planning for it. So why is closure important? Can someone read the screen for me, please?
Closure is important because it affirms the mentoring relationship and lessons learned, provides the mentee with relative insight and doesn't leave them guessing or creating their own narratives, and provides the acknowledgement needed to cope with the loss of relationship.
Thank you, Becca. When we're providing information on high quality programs and all of the things that our programs should not only implement, but target and try to bring out of kids, we often hear about social emotional learning skills. We hear about the 5 C's of positive youth development, and we hear about creating value and connections. And so this is how you kind of sum up mentoring relationships by providing these closure experiences. You allow for people to have time to reflect and talk about the experiences they had, whether good or bad, but you do take time again to make sure people just digest what they've experienced. Can we think or name some reasons that matches don't work and end up coming to a close? Anyone have an example of why a match?
Yeah.
Yes.
So one thing that we've seen in Team Up is that our mentees grow up. So when they enter into the program, they could be like 7, 8, 9, whatever. And then something that we've seen very recent is when they turn 16, 17, the interest is no longer there. The mentor's feelings are deeply crushed. They take it really personal. And so they're just ready to end it right then and there. So that's something that we've been seeing across the board. So we try to provide education on teenagers. But then, like I said, the feelings are there already, with the mentor. So it's kind of hard to reel them back in.
Thank you, Ms. Jessica with the fly glasses. I appreciate that. And also, Priscilla named in the chat, like someone moves due to a job. And so, yes, life happens. These kids grow up, or perhaps the youth is unsatisfied. And so I think it was Becca's question or example where the youth or the mentor was unsatisfied from, pretty much Jump Street right at the beginning of the relationship. Or as Jessica just described, kids grow up. And so perhaps they're matched with one person early on in life, and then they grow up and they become unsatisfied with that relationship just because it no longer suits them. Regardless of the reason, we can prepare for all of these things, but it does take time, and it does take program teams having conversations about these possibilities. Some red flags that you can look to help determine if a relationship is like not going to work would be what's on the screen. And this slide should look a little bit familiar. If you do need to look to a guidebook beforehand, before we get you your new one on Tuesday, this is a slide that we also mentioned in the last training for monitoring and providing support, because red flags are red flags. And the earlier you see them, hopefully the quicker you'll be able to step in and intervene and, try to keep people not necessarily paired together, but within the program. Once it's determined that people need to separate and termination has been established, then you do have to move on with that process. Also, Priscilla mentioned that family dynamics get better or worse for mentees or mentors. Can you say a little bit more about that quickly for me, Priscilla? What did you mean by that?
Well, the mentoring program that I work in, we deal with homelessness. We deal with families that are either on the edge of being homeless or are homeless. the parents may have issues, so they may be living with grandparents, you know, that type of thing. And the same thing with the mentor. A mentor may be, you know, fine, and then all of a sudden they find that they're having to take care of a parent due to an illness or, you know, whatever the case may be. So those family dynamics change, and they work into, you know, what we're trying to do, keeping them connected, you know.
Thank you, Priscilla. And I would classify those things that you just mentioned as life, you know, because life happens. That's a part of life. Sometimes things are unexpected. Sometimes people change their minds. But regardless of the reason for the closure, we do have to make sure that we are aware of why it's happening so that we can prepare the closure accordingly. I see Raven mentioned, Raven, I'm losing it. The mentee isn't receptive to mentoring because of other issues. And then Karen mentioned, does anyone have an example of mentors continuing through a personal challenge? So some positive spin to the closure. And if you do have an example of what Karen asked for, if you wouldn't mind typing it into the chat, that would be great. Just in order of, you know, just because of time, I do have to move on from this point, but I would like to be able to capture that feedback, because we're talking about closure. We're talking about, you know, things that feel negative, but it would be nice to hear about an experience that didn't necessarily end and showed people powering through some of the muddiness.
Hey, we do have a hand up from Raven.
Hi guys. Yeah, I actually did want to speak on just real quickly experience I did have at a former school I used to work at. I did have a mentee that was assigned to me. They said that, you know, she had some behavioral issues. She wasn't really receptive to a lot of people, so she had been passed around from mentor to mentor, and they felt like that she made, I don't know, take to me a little more than anyone else that she had worked with. And so I did take her under my wing, and it was a lot of pushback at first. It was. She was not receptive at all. She did not want to hear any of my advice. You know, she didn't. But I, as far as a positive spin on that, I was consistent, and I think that's I was consistent and I was patient. So I think those are two really important things, that when you are dealing with, sometimes you do have mentees who are just simply not receptive at first, because I did learn down the line that her home life was not great. She was like one of like 7 children. And so the attention on her was, it lacked in a very high, you know, manner. So no one really paid attention to her. And she actually expressed that to me later on down the line, you know, because I had been consistent and made sure that I stayed in her life. You know, I hate to be long-winded, I'm sorry, but, you know, she was just, she felt like that was you know, it made a huge difference, and she started to open up to me more, and then her school life started to improve as well. So as far as a positive spin on that, like, you know, I feel like consistency and patience is very important.
Raven, thank you for sharing and making sure your voice was heard. It's all good. Look, we only come together for short bursts of time, and we could talk together for so long because there are so many resources and stories that are useful. I'm happy that you shared your voice, because going back to Kinshasa's point about people being able to detach, I can't say for sure that that little girl might have become that type of person, but it is very likely that that little girl might have become that type of person who seemed like it was easy for her to detach from any kind of relationship if you wouldn't have stepped in and took your time with her and, you know, provided that consistent modeling for her to be able to learn how to be within a positive relationship with an adult. So thank you for making sure your voice was heard. Just to move on and make sure that we do save some time at the end for our activity, I want to call your attention to the screen. This is not necessarily a recommended practice directly from the Elements Guide. It doesn't come from the EEPM, but it does come from one of those resource guides that Sarah was talking about at the beginning. And this is specifically around supporting Black youth and even more specifically, Black men and young adults. And so it's telling us to take these things into consideration and again, have discussions with our teams about how these challenges impact the ending of relationships. And so drawing your attention to the recommended practice 6.2, what role may race, culture, or class have played in a match coming to an end? An early match or a match that, was in the 3-month mark after they got to know one another. Sometimes these challenges are not always surface level. Sometimes they are really complex. And so because our programs are created to provide lessons to students that they can take and use throughout their lives, it is worth the time it takes for programs to plan and have conversations about the dynamic ways that our programs impact these students to make sure that we're just prepared for as many scenarios and possibilities as possible. And again, in preparing for closures, there are several steps that should be considered by programs. Let's see here. Programs should consider the impact of closure for all stakeholders involved, including the mentor and mentee pairs, the parent, guardians, and other program participants. Especially in the match scenarios, we want to make sure that if people are staying in the program, but they're just terminating their relationship, that everybody impacted knows. We should also make sure we create time and space to formally train staff and train mentors on the closure experience. Programs have been known to hold like mid-program cycle meetings for staff members, and they use that mid-program time as like a kickoff to prepare for closure. Also at that time is when programs bring in organizations like Mentor Virginia to host closure conversations with their mentors so that they can be well-versed in just how youth can be impacted by successful and unsuccessful closure experiences. And so moving along, we've talked a lot about what you should do, the conversations you should have. It's really important not to skip like documentation and making sure that all of these things are written down formally. And that includes when relationships physically end. And so benchmark 6.6 tells us that programs should provide documents that closure procedures were followed. And so what that means is you should have paperwork that follows the trail of the closure experience. And that's paperwork for internal records and external relationships. And so some internal documents that we are aware of and that we're going to provide you examples of in the guidebook would be included on this list, but it's not an exhaustive list. You can also, Google some things. They may look familiar, they may be called something different, but there are internal documents and there are external documents. Any questions up until this point? Any questions or feedback? We have just a couple more slides before we jump into our activity. So I want to make sure this is being digested with everyone.
I asked a question in the chat. I just want to know if anybody had like any examples or kind of steps that they do during their closure meeting outside of like the paperwork.
Yep, and we're going to get to that in just a second, Juwan. Anybody else? Karen asked, do mentors and mentees touch base after closure? And so let's get right into some of the next steps. On this list here of internal documents, if you look to the last one, you see exit interviews, and it can be pre and post closure. And so I want to spend a little bit of a moment digging deeper on the exit interviews, and because I think it'll answer Juwan's questions. The benchmark tells us that we need to have exit interviews with mentees and mentors and possibly parents when it's relevant, but it doesn't really tell us when those meetings should take place. And so these interviews could happen before closures take place or after the relationship has been terminated. It really just depends on how the relationship came to an end. And so when it comes to, let's see, the pre-closures, pre-closure exit interviews may strike you to be more useful for well-timed, anticipated, and structured match pair closures. Program staff host a meeting with the mentor pair. And so it's you, the mentor, and the mentee, and possibly the parent, depending on what, how your program is set up. and you actually hold an exit interview. You give all of the individuals a form, they complete the form for themselves and provide you with that feedback. And then you as a staff person, you're also filling out a form as you're asking questions to the group. That kind of meeting and interview would be considered pre-closure. Post-closure can be the closures that occur when matches are not a good fit, but they want to stay in the program. And so both the mentor and mentee, possibly the parents, they complete an exit interview form before terminating the relationship, or excuse me, after terminating relationship, because again, they just wanted it to end. It wasn't a good fit, but you want their takeaway from that. And so did that answer your question, Jawan, or did you have your, did you need to kind of change it around a little bit to get more of what you were looking for?
Kind of yes and no. So in our policies and procedures, it mentions like a closure interview and like a closure summary. But I think as an agency, we're looking to do more like a formal sit down with like the mom, the guardian, the mentor, and the mentee. So kind of like an activity. So like Jessica and I were thinking about like Jeopardy, or like having dice, and like the 1 or the 2 or the 3 would mean like a different thing. So I don't know if anybody else like does like a formal sit down, or like kind of like what they do, kind of like to make it more positive, especially if it's like ending on like a negative note.
Sure. Anybody have anything to add to that? Because we are going to talk about it here. So I can jump around for a second and then bring us back to our last couple of benchmarks if nobody had any feedback for Juwan. Okay, so activities that you can do. I like the idea of Jeopardy. There's like a memory book, the pictures, the journal. I think you can decide on the activities or the events that you want or that you have time for, or whatever your budget permits. But when it comes to the purpose or the intention of the meeting, it doesn't really matter what it looks like or the activity that you use. I think as long as your agenda or your itinerary for the day covers the following agenda items, I think you're gonna, get the information you're looking to collect, as long as you set that meeting up or that activity up to include these things. And so I think on those agendas would be reviewing what the match closure is and what the process will be. And so at what point are we going to start it? What steps do you have to take in order for us to say that this match pair is finished? Make sure that you are reviewing the post-closure contact options. If these people do want to stay in contact, is that going to be like the program's responsibility? How much impact will the program have on that? You want to reflect on the relationship between the folks. And then you also want to, distribute some physical token of appreciation or completion. And so hopefully, Jawan, that targeted, some of it for you. If not, we will definitely be able to come back to it at the end once we finish our activity. And so I'm backing up a little bit to make sure we have a chance to talk about benchmark 6.5, and that's to rematch or not to rematch. Not all programs have to have a procedure that allows mentors and mentees to match with other people if they decide to terminate those relationships. Perhaps you don't have the time or capacity to do so, but it is a program responsibility to establish a system that you're either going to decide to rematch, and you work out a process that states that, or you're not going to rematch and you work out a process that states that as well. And here is another example of a sample closure, as we talked about closure letters a little bit earlier, and that'll be an example that's in the guide. Finally, also to Jawan's point, because it is a benchmark, you should have discussions with both the mentors and the mentees that go over all of the following topics. And so you'll see from the agenda items that I discussed with you all, Jawan, that some of these things are parsed out through those agenda items and making sure that the feelings are talked about. We understand the reason and the timing for closure. And also always to point H, that we've discussed the possibility, or excuse me, of rematching if the program is still going on and we need to put people with other people. And so benchmark 6.7 calls all of this out for programs to do at the benefit of the mentor. Benchmark 6.8 calls out the same points, but this is for the benefit of the mentee. And again, to the agenda items that we've already reviewed and the activities as well. And so finally, our last benchmark here is making sure that there is a written public statement to parents, as well as other mentors and mentees that outline the terms of the match closure and the policies for using social media or just maintaining contact after the program ends. And so this can be that letter that we showed you just a bit ago, but it can also be taken care of in like a handbook that you give to all participants at the beginning. It could be that copy of the contract that they sign, as long as they receive that written public statement or it's somewhere for them to be easily accessed. We're just saying it's a best practice to make sure one exists. And so I am going to come off of share really quickly before we go into our activities to see if there are any questions, because we had to move quickly in certain spots and I want to make sure you have information to go into the sessions with. Any questions, comments, or concerns at this point? Okay. All right. We are going to spend the next 7 to 8 minutes in breakout rooms, and Sarah is going to help me do this logistically. Sarah, how many breakout rooms are we going to have today?
I think we might do 4.
Okay.
Looking at the numbers.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen again. And if you've been in the workshops previously, this breakout will work pretty similarly. There will be a document that you will have access to be able to copy and write on. Once you get in your breakout rooms, if you're in group or room 1 or 4, you're going to look to scenario A. If you're in group 2, you'll look to scenario B. And if you're in group 3, you'll look to scenario C. You'll read through the scenario together with your team, and you will follow the prompt questions to tell us how you're going to prepare a closure based on the scenario that you have. And so again, we'll spend about 7 to 8 minutes on this, and then we'll probably only have time for one team to share out, but all teams should prepare because no telling who we're going to ask to share. All right, Miss Sarah, if you wouldn't mind opening up the breakout rooms, please. She has already dropped the link to the activity in the chat.
And all rooms are open.
We made
This meeting is being recorded.
the adaptation to go an hour and a half for trainings and online stuff. I think a lot of places did and shifted from in real life to virtual reality. But now that we're living in virtual reality, and we find ourselves running out of time when we do content for an hour and a half. So I'm happy you guys thought it was brutal. That means that you were really invested in your conversation. Is any one group really excited to go between the 4 years? Does any one group have something to say? We have time for one share out. Not everybody at one time, I know. Pipe down, pipe down.
We didn't really even get to finish answering the question.
Yeah, we didn't either. Ours was, I'll share because ours is a little heavy, but I could definitely, foresee something like this happening where there was I think I'm trying to remember the scenario, child in the program for 3 years, really active, had a wonderful mentor, an advocating mentor, spoke with the coach and the teachers and things when mentor wasn't doing so well. Mentee wasn't doing so well. But the mentor was married to a man. Dad was not happy about him being married to a man, and so was pulling the child out of the program.
It was a man married to a man. Got you.
Yeah. And so it was like, my child's not returning. The direct words in the scenario was, we don't do that gay stuff. So we're pulling the child out. And I think we hadn't even gotten to the second question.
I know. No.
Before the timer started, but I think we said it was, what was the second one?
You want to tap it again?
I didn't hear you.
Unanticipated.
Yes, that's what it was. It was.
Sorry, I had to bring it up again too to remember.
It was unanticipated, and what we kind of discussed was that, even though this match is closing, it's a definite dad is going to keep his kid out. but highlighting the positives of the mentor. So that's how we would close the match. Like, you did X, Y, and Z for this mentee. You advocated for this mentee, and we would definitely, like to highlight the positives. But then on the other side, it's like, did the parents know the mentor's orientation before he was even matched? So it's just like a bunch of different questions, but regardless, the mentor served his purpose, did what he was supposed to do. So highlighting that and closing the match is how we would have gone with the closure.
Thank you, Jessica and Anise. And just to fill in a little bit of maybe some of the gaps for those who didn't have a chance to read it, I believe the setup was they were preparing for their year-end celebration and like a showcase. So it was the program and everyone was expecting to go into these closure experiences together and, meet each other's family. And it was like a family reunion, so to speak, to celebrate the program. And as the program staff was checking permission forms, that's when they got the decline from the parent and the note. And so that's how they found out that that person wasn't going to allow the mentor the closure experience. And so Jessica and Anise said that it was unanticipated, which it was totally unanticipated, but it takes it a little bit deeper into the difficult closure territory because a party became unwilling. Even though the mentee wasn't unwilling, the parents were. And so, it was on the program staff to really provide that closure experience for the mentor. And I'm really happy that you spoke up, Jessica, because a lot of times we get into these scenarios, and we even get into this frame of mind when we're talking about closure and we're focusing a lot on the mentee, which is not wrong because we're youth providers. We want to focus on the youth, but we also have to focus on the mentor at times. And it's just as important to make sure that they walk away having not only gratifying experiences, but useful experiences. And so again, using that scenario to really highlight that. I appreciate it. All right, I'm sorry I don't have time to talk about the rest of the stuff, but again, we're gonna work on that for future because there's a lot more we can do in terms of sharing and learning from one another. As you create your programs, also consider the impact of, alternative programs. Just talked about how we went from transitioning in life services to web services. So as Sarah mentioned at the beginning, this presentation is really thought of for the traditional one-to-one scenarios. Consider the impact that an e-mentoring program may have and what you may need to change when it comes to what you can do for closure. Same thing for group mentoring programs and episodic mentoring experiences. And what I would consider an episodic mentoring experience or an example of one would be a mentoring program who brings in adults to work with children, but perhaps those adults don't work with the same children every time, or, it's not as consistent as your traditional mentoring program. Well, Miss Sarah, we're at another roundup.
Yes, so this is your roundup on closure planning tools so that we have a whole lot more than just what's listed here in the companion workbook, which again, we'll deliver to you by Tuesday. But you'll have a whole suite of closure tools. There's some sample activities. There's a sample of the full match closure summary that we kind of showed you a snippet of and how your program can use that to help keep records of the closure that's happening. Sample closure letters that you might send to the mentor and that you might send to the parent or guardian of the mentee, as well as some sample closure exit interviews for the parent guardian, for the mentee, for the mentor. And I think we also have just a general exit interview template as well. So all those resources and more will be in the companion.
Didn't I say I wasn't going to mute? I did it again. I'm sorry, folks. Thank you, Sarah. We have gotten to the end of all the benchmarks, but we do want to make sure we leave a little bit of time to cover some of the enhancements because they are just as important, and we have talked about them briefly throughout our time together today. And so Enhancement 6.1 tells us that at the conclusion of a program explores opportunities with mentors, mentees, and parents when relevant around continuing a match and how much time that's going to be in play for. And so please consider what your program's role or take will be on allowing your mentors and mentees to continue their relationships past your program cutoff. Some questions to kind of help you get going as you work these things out. if and how the program, or not necessarily questions, but things to think about. If and how the program may remain involved. Are you going to provide support in any way, or is your program over? And that's kind of where you draw the line with providing support. How are you going to help these people transition out of the program? What if the parents decline? Like, we had the one situation that Jessica just mentioned. And then what if the mentor or mentee changes their mind somewhere in that? And so if your program supports people who continue their relationships outside of the program year, and somebody decides to change their mind during that time, make sure you think about that and just have a solution for it. An example of a form you can use to help close out a relationship would be this type of form right here, where you're spelling out exactly what contact can look like. And again, this is just a sample. It'll be in your companion guide. Another enhancement is around celebrations. It's nice to commemorate the experience. And so if you have any specific celebrations or events that come to mind for you, if you wouldn't mind typing them into chat to share your ideas with folks, it would be greatly appreciated. Whether some of the things you plan to do or some of the things you've done in the past to commemorate your mentoring program. And as you're getting that in the chat, we're going to move along to the second to last one. Enhancement 6.3 is around helping your students begin to advocate for themselves. And so we're regarding this as youth-initiated mentoring, helping them to assess some of the adults that are in their lives, perhaps their aunts, their uncles, bus drivers, or just other people who they see often, giving them the tools and the language to be able to ask those people to formalize their relationship so that they can have a mentoring experience. And Laura typed in a closure activity that I'm always a fan of. When in person, she uses cake and balloons to allow the matches to just reflect on their experience together. Anywhere that there is cake, I am a fan of. And I think that's actually the end. We're to another roundup.
Yes, and so this roundup is all about that youth-initiated mentoring or the identification of natural mentors. Just to confuse you, there's another way we're starting to describe this work, which is called everyday mentoring. So if you didn't catch that, there are 3 different ways that we can describe this work. I think going forward, you might hear everyday mentoring more often. This is new work that we are kind of digging our toes into in 2022. But one of the things that will be in your companion workbook, if you all have not heard this, Mentor just launched a brand new guide called Becoming a Better Mentor, Strategies to Be There for Young People. And this guide is the first dedicated guide for mentors, because when we're talking today about the elements of effective practice, that's been one of Mentor's kind of, trademarked, primary documents that they have sort of held up and elevated over the years. But that's for program coordinators and program staff. So this is really the first resource that is designed specifically for mentors with guidance on strategies that they can implement to be there for young people. And this is for mentors who are in structured programs, and also for mentors who are kind of coming more at the everyday or natural mentoring space. So like your bus drivers, your teachers, anybody who's having contact with a young person on a regular basis. And as part of that, we are launching an everyday mentoring workshop on February 10th. So we'll make sure that you have the information about that, and you can bring yourselves, bring your mentors, bring anybody that you want to that workshop that we're going to be hosting. And we are also doing everyday mentoring weekly tips. This is a new thing that we're doing in 2022. So if you want to subscribe to, you can subscribe yourself. You can also get your mentor signed up to get weekly tips from us on how to it'll be something different every week that you can, something that you can implement in a mentoring relationship, whether, again, that's a structured relationship or it's just more of a naturally occurring relationship in that child's life. There'll be something that you can use in those tips every single week. Okay, and then so yep, these are also my slides here. So we are really kind of coming to the tail end of the workshop today. we kind of touched on this at the beginning, but here's some actual faces to put to the no cost consulting that we do provide with a partnership with the National Mentoring Resource Center. We're able to provide no cost assistance to programs. So again, if there's anything that we can do to support your programs, closure processes, please know that you can apply at any time to work with any of these lovely faces that you see on the screen to work on that or any other elements of your program. The final EEP workshop, and I'm going to drop some links into the chat right now for you so that you can access the registration for this. We'll be on February 18th. We'll be talking about evaluating mentoring programs. So throughout the entire series so far, we've really been laying the groundwork from what to do all the way up to the point of evaluating. So at this point, hopefully you've learned a lot of the foundational pieces to really implement the program. And what we're going to be focusing on next time is what to do when you're ready to evaluate. And so we'll have a lot of different tools and all sorts of great information about different forms of evaluation. So we hope that you join us for this final workshop in the series. And as a reminder, if you have missed any of the other workshops so far and you would like to earn the series certificate, one of the links in the chat will take you to the resource hub that we have where you can find all the previous recordings of our workshops, all of the PowerPoint presentations, all of the companion guides that we've created, as well as all of the assessments. So if you missed any of the workshops live, you will need to take the assessment for that workshop in order to have that be counted toward attending all 8 to get that certification. And lastly, please let us know your feedback. Again, this is the first time that we're offering this series, and we are finding that we typically run out of time. So that's one thing we have noted that we will work on and figuring out how to restructure and think about that going forward so that there's ample time to cover all the things we want. But we do hope that you will give us any feedback that you have on ways that we can be better next time. I'll pass it back over to T.
Thank you, Ms. Sarah, and thank you all for your time, your participation, especially your participation. I love an active class and people who like to share and give feedback. I am a chatty Cathy, and so I never mind one. It always makes the conversation just more enriching. So at this time, I have nothing else to say. I have 3 minutes left of your time. Any final questions or final thoughts? All right. Well, it has been a pleasure. Please enjoy the rest of your days. It's Friday, y'all. I hope you have, plans for the weekend that leave you safe and coming back refreshed on Monday. Take care. Thank you.